Please.
Okay, we're recording.
Okay. So, I'm going to tell you all a story. Most of you are going to know this story because it was in an episode of American classic Seinfeld. So in this scene, Jerry and Kramer are talking about whatever, and Jerry, in a fit of anger, accidentally hits this conveniently placed spoon that launches this conveniently placed knife into the air. The knife goes flying into the air, and poor Jerry. He wakes up in the hospital to find out that he received a blood transfusion from Kramer. Now, it looks like he's scared to have Kramer's blood in his body, borrowing things from his blood, but he knows the risks behind blood transfusions. Professor Sanders, the chief of the Department of Anesthesiology in Inglewood Hospital, New Jersey, is quoted saying, "Transfusions are so ingrained in clinical practice that in many clinical situations, a significant number of transfusions are given to alleviate physicians' discomfort rather than care for the patient's needs." Also, blood transfusions are potentially dangerous, according to a study done by Dr. Chatterjee and colleagues in the article, the study Association of Blood Transfusion with Increased Mortality in Myocardial Infarction, published January 2013. The study came to a conclusion that a blood transfusion strategy compared to using no blood has been associated with a higher mortality rate in patients. The purpose of the speech is to bring to the audience's attention a new form of treatment in the event of a blood loss called fluid volume expanders. Apparently volumizers isn't actually the technical term for it. I myself have decided to abstain from blood as a part of my faith, so I have done much research in the past as of now. And in this speech, I'll explain the major risks of blood transfusions, the process behind cleaning blood and how it isn't always effective, and finally, what are volume expanders and why they are safer. So first we're going to start with blood transfusions and how they have and their health risks. The first health risk is called a transfusion reaction. Basically, according to a study done by Dr. Sandeep Sanu and colleagues in the called Adverse Events Related to Blood Transfusion of the Indian Journal of Anesthesia, published in 2014, the interaction of a patient's blood when released to the donor's blood can cause an instant destruction of the transfused red blood cells. Basically, your body thinks that the donated blood is a cold or another form of bacteria, and it treats it like a foreign invader. If you thought that Jerry and Kramer fought a lot in the show, well, they're going to be fighting a lot inside of Jerry's body now too. So, and the reaction can begin immediately after the transfusion, even leading to death. Another risk of a blood transfusion, published by the Journal of Transitional Medicine, led by Dr. Florian Bill and colleagues, published in an article called Transfusion-Transmitted Infections in the year 2007, they released a list of different diseases that were transmitted by blood transfusions. Many of you know of HIV, that is a very common one. Also hepatitis B, malaria, West Nile virus, human Crohn's disease, and even inactive pathogens or unknown pathogens that we don't even know about today could be transfused through a blood transfusion. Now, with blood cleaning, these diseases can all be cleaned out, as the opposing side will mention. However, let's talk about how blood cannot be completely sterilized. Now, when you go to a doctor's office, you'll probably hear the term sterile thrown around for their tools and equipment. Now, what does it mean to be sterile? According to Thomas von Woodecke and colleagues in their article Plasma Sterilization, What Are the Conditions to Meet This Claim, published in 2008, the definition of sterile means the complete absence of viable microorganisms. So, red blood cells, however, are considered viable microorganisms. Therefore, blood cannot be completely sterilized, meaning that they would have that in their cleaning process they would have to target each individual disease that needs to be filtered out. It can be accurate, but it is also very expensive. Now, according to an article written by Mary Engel of the LA Times called "Making the Blood Supply Safe Also Makes It More Expensive," published in September 2nd of 2007, it indicates from 1979 to 2000, the amount of hospitals paid for blood units has increased over 5% at each year. And for the Downey Medical Center, in their records, in 2001, blood costed between about $800K and $950K a year. But in 2007, that increased to $2.3 million per year for the same amount of blood. And now this also causes a lower shelf life once the blood has been cleaned. We're going to talk about that next. Now, what is nitric oxide? Basically, nitric oxide is a chemical that is in blood. There are many functions to nitric oxide, and the main function, though, is to regulate blood pressure by keeping the blood vessels open. Now, why am I bringing this up? It's because when blood is stored, that compound immediately begins to break down. And there's a quote saying, "It doesn't matter how much oxygen is being carried by red blood cells, it cannot get to the tissues that need it without nitric oxide." So this is a cytoscan of a patient who just received a blood transfusion. Now if you look, these little dots are all the red blood cells. The blood is not flowing. It's not getting to the tissues, and it is not doing its function that it's supposed to be doing. There's uneven distribution. Now we're going to talk about how blood volume expanders and what their purpose is. Before I do that, I'm going to tell you how to make soup. So, you get your can of soup, you add water to the soup, you cook it, maybe some salt in there too, and then boom, you have soup. If you're serving more people, then you'll add more water to give you more soup volume. So, why am I telling you guys how to make soup? Because volume expanders work the same way as how I just described it. Now, the priority in blood loss situations is to get oxygen to the tissues, not red blood cell count. Blood volume expanders, there's many types of expanders. The most common type is regular saline, which is regular salt water with salt used to match the amount of salt in your own body. Saline and Ringer solutions, basically they enter through the bloodstream through an IV, and they expand the blood volume so that it can reach to all the blood tissues, and it flows through the blood vessels and eventually is removed from the body through the urine. This is a video that shows the blood transfusion in a patient, and you can see that there's much more of a flow through the patient, which means that the blood cells are getting the oxygen to the tissues like normal. So to compare and to conclude, blood transfusions, with a high risk of transfusion reactions that can lead to death. Nitric oxide count is lowered, which means that less oxygen is getting to the tissues. And blood cannot be made sterile, but it can be cleaned. And according to that article that was mentioned earlier, getting HIV is actually 1 in 2 million. So the process of cleaning is actually very effective. However, it doesn't compare to volume expanders because it is completely sterile. There's no chance of getting diseases. It also delivers oxygen to the tissues just as it's supposed to, and it is naturally filtered out of the body when it is no longer needed. So I hope that you learned more about volume expanders, and now that we know more about blood volume expanders, hopefully Jerry can get through a nice, long, happy life with his blood transfusion. Thank you.